Bonsoir à tous et à toutes. Alors, je vais commencer juste par présenter Nigra Iuventa, qui est Nigra Iuventa is a Montreal-based non-profit dedicated to the development and recognition of Afro-descendant and African artists in contemporary art. We support the creation, dissemination, and preservation of the work of Afro-descendant and African artists in Quebec and internationally. Bonsoir à tous et à toutes. Donc, je suis Diane Gistal, la directrice générale et la curatrice chez Nigra Iuventa, qui est un organisme à but non lucratif dédié au développement et à la reconnaissance des artistes afrodescendants et africaines en art contemporain, en soutenant la création, la diffusion et la préservation de leurs œuvres. Ce soir, nous renouvelons pour la 3e année consécutive notre partenariat avec l'AGAC dans le cadre de la foire Plural. Donc merci à Emiko, à Marie-Jeanne et à l'ensemble de l'équipe pour leur accueil et pour leur engagement. Cette conversation, elle s'inscrit dans le prolongement des discussions amorcées dans le cadre du symposium RAN, Réseau de l'Atlantique Noir, dont la première édition a réuni plus de 1290 participants à Montréal en novembre 2025. Ce soir, nous poursuivons ce dialogue ici à Plural, avec un regard centré sur le collectionnement, parce que soutenir les artistes, ça commence par acquérir leurs œuvres. Si cette conversation vous inspire, je vous invite à vous abonner à notre infolettre pour nous suivre nos prochains événements et vous trouverez donc les liens sur nos réseaux sociaux. Je suis heureuse d'accueillir 3 invités d'exception ce soir. It's my pleasure to welcome 3 exceptional guests this evening. Notre modératrice, Yolonda Abrahams, directrice du Curatorial. Nos panélistes, Kenneth Montague, fondateur du Wedge Curatorial Project et de la Wedge Collection, et Tagny, artiste multidisciplinaire. Merci à tous les 3 d'être là ce soir, et je laisse la parole à Yolanda.
Thank you, Diane, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Bonsoir. My name is Yolanda Abrahams. I am a director at Cooper Cole Gallery, a contemporary art gallery in Toronto, where we work with artists at various stages in their careers across all disciplines, some of whom we are presenting this weekend at Plural. We are at booth 120 on the main floor, so be sure to stop by and say hello. Before I get into our discussion, I want to quickly situate us and our topic, the art collector as a social actor, which will explore the evolving role of collectors within contemporary African and diasporic art ecosystems. Moving beyond acquisition, today's conversation will consider how collectors shape circulation, visibility, and historical narratives, and how their responsibilities extend into stewardship, mentorship, and infrastructure building. So we should begin with some introductions. Today, I am joined by Dr. Ken Montague. Ken Montague is a Toronto-based dentist, art collector, and the founding director of Wedge Curatorial Projects, a nonprofit arts organization. Since 1997, Ken has been promoting both emerging and established artists via exhibitions, lectures, and workshops. His focus is African, Canadian, and diasporic art, which he also showcases in his privately owned Wedge collection, one of Canada's largest Black art collections, focusing on exploring African diasporic culture and contemporary Black life. Welcome, Ken. We also have the phenomenal Tagny here with us this evening. Ev is a Montreal-based artist who weaves lens-based media, performance, and text into site-specific installation. Her practice adopts a poetic approach to consider landscapes and gardens as sites shaped by cycles of rejuvenation, tangled with legacies of colonial expansion, capital accumulation, private ownership, and human activity. Ev has exhibited and performed in notable museums and spaces internationally, including the Swiss Institute in New York, the Henry Art Gallery in Seattle, and the Momenta Biennale here in Montreal. She just had her first European institutional solo exhibition at the Westfälischer Kunstverein in Germany, and was longlisted for the Sobi Art Award in 2024. It was also recently announced that Ev will be a resident for Gasworks, a prestigious residency in London. Yep. And will be representing Canada, so big up to Ev. Her works are included in several corporate and private permanent collections, including Ken Montague's Wedge collection. So welcome, Ev. So let's get into it. I think we're going to chat for a bit, and then the audience will have an opportunity to ask questions. For my first question, as a gallerist who works closely with collectors, I often notice the turning point when acquiring art becomes or moves beyond a transaction and starts to become something more meaningful for collectors and impactful for artists. So this is a question for you, Ken. Can you describe a moment when your engagement with an artist shifted from something transactional into something more purposeful?
Yeah, it's I will answer that, but I first want to say I'm just super thrilled to actually be here at Plural. Believe it or not, this is my first Plural fair. And I'm based in Toronto, and I did go to the previous incarnation, but I've never been to Plural fair, which is a bit, well, I would say that's a little shocking, but here I am.
Yeah.
And I want to say thank you to, to Nigra, Iuventa, and to ACAG, to all the folks who actually put this together, and it did take a bit of work, so big ups to Diane, to Emiko, and to the gang. Great work. And also need to say that it's also a great honor to sit with Ev Tagny, who we don't know each other so well. You might think that, we are chummy, but in fact, we've only met a couple of times before. But we've had kind of a very deep kind of connection over the last few weeks. And I would say that your practice is an art practice that I've followed for many years before I acquired work. And it also is just a super thrill to be here in your hometown. So thank you, Ev, for agreeing. So, there was a question there somewhere. Yeah, no, I got it. Well, I would say for me as a collector, it would be better maybe to give an example of a work that, or an artist in the collection that I met and followed, and then there's this sort of dance that you do as an artist and collector. And a good example would be Dawit Petros, and many of you would know Dawit, who's represented by a Montreal gallery, and he's, I'm his first collector, probably his biggest collector. Met Dawit when he was graduating in 2003 from Concordia, and just a really interesting artist. His family came as refugees from Eritrea. They ended up in Western Canada in the prairies, and then he goes to art school in the French-speaking part of Canada, and he goes to grad school in Boston. So, teaching now in America, like he's sort of, going back often now to the continent, to Eritrea. So he kind of represents a kind of, the real Afropolitan artist at this moment. And Dawit and I, we kind of literally schemed together. When I acquired his work, we did the first show with the Wedge project that was around having a guest curator, and that was Pamela Edmonds, who many of you might know, who's at Dalhousie now. And so the idea was to kind of do this show, get to know the work, get to know the artist, and then I had an opportunity to mount a show, one of the first shows from my collection that was at the ROM. That was the show Position as Desired. And it was thinking about how we position ourselves as Black Canadians within the kind of through the lens of contemporary art. So Dawit had a work that I already had in the collection, but I asked him to enlarge this work. We had a very large image of, this is the subject is the young man in the parka with the, holding the cross. And that became this sort of, it became an iconic image, but it became the signature image of this show. And then it was a very intentional thing to think how we can kind of place ourselves. The show was an intervention, an interruption into the Canadiana galleries where there were, all these sort of European forefathers, big oil paintings, and we put it in there amongst those. It was something that we talked about incessantly as sort of artist collector. How do we want to place this? And it was very much the beginning of a conversation that continues to this day. Dawit visited 2 months ago in my new home in Toronto. He's someone who we stay in touch. We talk about his career trajectory. So it's kind of like thinking about how we can maximize the impact of the artwork in the collection. It doesn't sit in the Wedge collection always in storage. The idea is to activate it through loans and to activate it through these intentional shows that are built around the collection. And that was a long answer for a short question.
That was great. Thank you for that answer. Ev, can you describe a moment when support around your work, whether from a curator, collector, or an institution, shifted in a meaningful way?
I guess most of my experience is more with working with curators or institutions than collectors directly. And obviously, like the most obvious example of entering a collection that has had an impact for me is being part of the book that became As We Rise, this beautiful book that you should all have. And, kind of gathers the work of so many artists of color, Black artists here in Canada and elsewhere. And it has become a touring show. And I had a really beautiful moment. I didn't see the show for many years, and then I was in London at the right time, and I caught it there. And it felt really special because I studied in London, so like kind of, seeing oh yeah, this is my page, thank you. But like seeing the 18-year-old Ev kind of working in pubs and slumming it, and like then being on the wall of like the Saatchi Gallery, kind of having that as a point of reference, and then being part of a conversation that's way bigger than just my work. So yeah, I think that's really what comes to mind for sure. So thank you.
Thank you for that answer, Ev. Okay, I want to dig deeper into what it means to move from acquisition to responsibility. This is a question for you, Ken. Black art collectors often operate with a deep sense of historical obligation, viewing themselves not merely as patrons of art, but custodians of culture, history, and the global Black experience. How do you reconcile personal taste with the responsibility to address historical gaps? And have there been moments when those two were in tension?
Right. How to answer that? I feel like, like most of us, it's still at the root of it about visual pleasure. Is the artwork moving you? Is it something that you want to live with? But I have to say, I was very lucky to have a great early experience. My parents were immigrants from Jamaica who came really early. Actually, 1950s, they were at university, like in New York and in Toronto, and then ended up in Little Windsor, one of the small little, southernmost city in Canada, across from Detroit. So that was the bonus, that I was beside Detroit, which was a real bastion of African American culture. So I remember as a kid going to the DIA, the Detroit Institute of Arts, and seeing an image that might be going by there, the image of the couple in the raccoon coats in front of that Cadillac, and in their Harlem brownstone, living their best life. And I saw that image, which was a photograph by James Van Der Zee, the Harlem Renaissance photographer. It's probably 1930, 1932 maybe. And I was a 10-year-old, and I saw that on the wall at the DIA, and I was not seeing images of Black folks in my life at that stage in Windsor, on TV, in movies, on billboards, in magazines that looked like that couple. So really early on, I knew I wanted to spend a longer time with the image than seeing it on the walls of a gallery. So, you don't know you're a collector at 10 years old, even though I was actually already collecting salt and pepper shakers. But you kind of have a sense that you want to have a longer conversation, even as a kid. And it took me down a sort of a journey. So I'm kind of feeling like, this sense of historical obligation. I have to say, I don't feel like I'm a mouthpiece, for the Black community, but I will say that I'm trying hard to make work that feels true for me in terms of making work. I'm saying with the nonprofit Wedge Curatorial projects, with the programming that we do, which is a bit like Nigra Iuventa, and very much in line with a kind of a ethos around care and an ethos around, I have to say for my collection, it's really an artist-driven collection. So I'm thinking about the many different ways of being black. And it's not limited actually to black artists, which is a misconception. I'm thinking about the many different ways to look at black life. And I think that, you know, as a non-academic, I mean, I studied how to do root canals. I didn't study art, but in a private way, I read a lot, a big library, kind of got into it and figured that the way forward for my collection is really about asking the artists in the collection about other artists. And that's almost always how I discover new works. And then this idea of kind of, you know, being a custodian of culture, I feel like it's a very organic thing. The works build on themselves. It really is a kind of an organic process, but it started with a kind of a idea about my own identity. And then quickly, early on, I realized it's something I'd rather kind of share. I don't really want to be a art dealer. I don't want to be, I want to be a storyteller. I don't have the curatorial training, but I have a kind of a vision about how the works might be put together. So it's been a fun process. So it's about the sharing and leading with artists more than I'm so intentional about being custodian. I think those things follow when you care about the artists and, you know, you start having relationships with the living artists in the collection. It deepens your concern for their art practice, and you want to build and grow with them, you know?
Thank you for that, Ken. So supporting artists shouldn't stop once an artwork is sold. I think we can all agree. In fact, that's really only the beginning. When support ends at the purchase, something important is missing. Galleries often notice the difference between real patronage and service level support. Ev, this is a question for you. From your perspective as an artist, what distinguishes a collector who truly supports an artistic practice from one who simply owns the work? What actions make that difference tangible to you? What can collectors do concretely?
Thank you. That's interesting because I'm not sure, to be honest, because it's kind of a side of the world of the practice that I know less, because it's kind of what I focus on in the studio is, what I control is my practice. And then I don't control what comes of it, in a way. And I think for sure what I can imagine as being support would be, you know, a collector landing works, a collector talking about your work. I think moments where I've seen like threads is like, for instance, if I'm applying for a prize and I realize that, you know, a curator that I've worked with or somebody who's been following my work sits on a jury, for instance, or like puts your name forward for a project, or, you know, kind of becomes a little bit a steward of like your practice. You know, even just introducing peers and friends to your work. And I think, you know, Ken is a good example, like even, yeah, kind of not just collecting and it's sitting in vaults as like an investment. You know, I think that is kind of, unfortunately for artists, maybe an unfortunate thing that can happen maybe to a work. It depends on your relationship to work as well. Obviously, I do a lot of site-specific installation, so, you know, for me it lives more in like the frames or the videos. And so, yeah, I think just knowing that there is like love or care around it. Like I had this beautiful moment this year, you probably know about, where my friend in the UK was like, I saw your name in British Vogue, and it's mentioned that like it's a portrait of Michaela Cole, the actress, and she owns my work, and the writer wrote about it, and I was just like, I've arrived. But like, it's just such a simple thing for the writer to mention my name, but to me it has like such an impact, even just I don't know, to have it printed, that it's like it becomes part of an archive, and then like literally DM like Michaela Cole, and she was like, I love it. I'm so happy to live with this work, you know, and this is the best thing, to know that it's living with someone who appreciates it. And like, I'm sure she hosts fabulous parties, and she's like, do you enjoy my collection? So, you know, yeah, I think
You need to get
definitely
invited to the party.
I know. I think she was making an orzo in the article. I'm waiting for my invite. But I think just really disseminating the work as much as possible is the most helpful thing.
Thank you, Ev. That's actually a great segue into my next question. I want to talk about the circulation of artwork. The circulation of an artwork, where it's shown, who buys it, can shape both market value and art history. Collectors in particular have a lot of influence, as their support can help artists gain recognition, including from major institutions. So Ken, in this moment when African and diasporic art is highly visible in the art market, and many collectors and institutions are working towards more equitable visibility, how can collectors and curators engage more consciously rather than getting swept up in trends? What does conscious collecting look like to you?
Yeah, as I said before, I think, care and intention have to be the paramount thing. But I will say that you're in a privileged position as a collector, so I think it does come with, in my opinion, a responsibility to protect, support, and promote those artists. And so, for me, that takes the form of working with institutions. So, I think I was very lucky to be asked to join this the first Africa Acquisitions Committee at Tate Modern in, gosh, that was a long time ago, maybe 2011 or 2010. And so amazing to me that the most visited public gallery in the world just had a complete dearth of artists from the African continent and diaspora. It was shocking. We were literally telling them about, and the we is this committee, there were lawyer from, his parents are from Uganda, who lives in Melbourne, Australia, who's collecting, Ellen Atsui, but also artists that are, Caribbean Australian, and that was Samali Kiengi, and like meeting other people. You feel like you're an island doing what I do as a collector with the interests I have here. There, it was like. It was like the end of the book, The Chrysalids. It's like everyone's telepathic, It's like you were just like, these are my people. So that was a fascinating experience where you're seeing that there's just a few of us, but there were other collectors at that time who were thinking about beyond just their own collections. Like, we got to get this work into like permanent public galleries. Like, let's go with the Tate first. That's the one. And so you see how the needle can move with some real intention there, and you don't get asked to do those things without being in that privileged position of being a collector. So that's where you fall in the ecosystem. Like many of us who have immigrant parents, it was like, no surprise, I'm a doctor. That was the choice, doctor, dentist, or lawyer. but I was so kind of creative and artistic, and my friends were artists, and it's really funny. I think if you let happiness and satisfaction be the guide, you land where you're going to land. So I end up being this collector, and I feel like that with that goes that responsibility to sort of lift as we rise, and that really is the phrase in the book, right? This sort of like as we rise. And the Aperture Foundation that published this book a few years ago, we had many talks with the book editor, and it was like, how are we going to title this thing? And it ended up being that I gave a story, which is tied to your answer, around my late father, Spurgeon Montague, who was a teacher, an educator, and an industrial designer. He kind of always said to the three children, all of us, like this idea of talking about lifting as we rise. As you do well, you should be lifting up other people, pulling up people in your community. And I think that the Aperture was like, yes, that's kind of what you're doing with your collection, mixing, at the time anyway, the relatively unknown Ev Teniz with Ming Smith and Micheline Thomas and Gordon Parks and the well-known artists here. And that was my goal with this, which I think was successful, this idea of lifting everyone up. So, you know, not everyone's going to have the privileged position of like putting out a book, but I think what you can do as a collector is from the start share the collection publicly. Don't just buy for investment, as we're saying, but buy for love. And it doesn't have to be a particular, like mine is around thinking about Black life, but it's helpful to have a personal kind of ethos and a vision around what you want, whether it's a varied collection. Today I saw the Claridge collection, a corporate collection, the exact opposite, not focused on one thing, but there is a line between it in my mind about a collector who's really thinking about curiosity and amusement and really testing themselves. All the works have this line between them around, you know, the jokester or tricking your eye or tricking your... So I think there's always a line that you can find as a collector, and you work with that, and then it becomes a much more honest thing than just listening to an advisor who's telling you this is a hot artist this year. Like, that's not the way forward, I think, when you really want to move the mountain, you know?
Thank you for that. As a follow-up question, should collectors see themselves as temporary custodians whose role includes transitioning works into public collections? If so, how should that happen?
Yeah, I think that is the only way you can see it when a collection becomes a certain size. I mean, it's very organic. It's funny, I see Emily Kronig in the audience and Hannah Summers, who are both, you know, have worked many years with my collection, and, you know, they know it's like, wow, this thing started at, you know, 20, 25 images, and it was just photography, and it's morphed into, there's probably, you know, 400 to 500 works now. There's works in storage, there's works at a dental office, there's works in my home, there's works, many on loan right now. So it becomes this bigger thing that you do have a responsibility, I feel like, to kind of manage the collection and make sure that the artists are being represented properly. And I do think that, you know, when you feel like the collection is at a certain level of prominence, that is the moment to do a project like a book or a project like an exhibition that kind of pulls it together. What I guess I'm saying is it's the public sharing that makes the difference. I found it's not about no one really knows what you have, and you're a small little group of friends and they get to see your collection at your home. And no. I mean, if you're leading with the artist, you're trying to get the work out there. And so we lend, kind of very rigorous lending program, because it isn't really benefiting the artist to be sitting around. And I did not answer your question. I went on a tangent. That's what I do. Sorry about that, Yolanda.
All good.
Yeah, I took that tangent.
Well, Ev, still on the topic of circulation, your work often appears in large institutional exhibitions and public programs like Toronto's Nuit Blanche. As your work circulates more widely, how do you navigate or think about the ways collectors and institutions can shape the context in which your work is seen and understood?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think a lot of my relationships and communication and are through curators mostly, and other artists, of course, but I mean, in terms of like showing the work within the context of an exhibition. And so a lot of the invitations, I guess, too, are from curators who love my work or appreciate it. So I think, in a way, like, they're the first, I would say, actors, and then there's the show, and then there's the collecting. So I think I'm more on that, kind of on that level. And then I think the way they're able to frame the work, or the way an institution is able to receive it or welcome it to, then is very crucial. And the way they're able to put words around, often I talk about my work often, but I just, I talk like a river and I babble and I'm like, well, I'm making so many links, and then to have these people are able to gather everything and then see more even than what you see and, you know, put it into words, I think it's just such an amazing skill. And to also like push you to think through ideas and just make sure that, I think for me, the way that again, like there's only so much control I have, but I think I try to be very mindful about not giving answers too quickly. Like I use a lot of fragmentation in my work, a lot of layering, you know, there's many different mediums. I never show the same work, which I really should start doing, but like, you know, because I don't want to be like narrowed down. I don't want to be pinned down. Oh, she's a black artist. She's a black Canadian artist. She's from Cameroon. She's this and that. I really want, you know, people to have questions or things to linger when they encounter the work. I don't want everything to be resolved because I think for me as a racialized artist working mostly, you know, in white majority contexts, like the biggest claim I can have is really to, you know, this kind of desire to have the right to be complex and to have the right to make mistakes or have contradictions within myself or within the work and have evolution too. You know, I really don't want kind of be swept in a trend of like, oh, Black Lives Matter, okay, yeah, no, racism is bad, and then when it's not useful anymore, we can throw you away. Like I really want to have like this fullness of vision, and yeah, I think that's like this idea. Like I think when you said Black life, like I think I really resonated with that because I just want to be, you know, one part of a bigger. It's not a monolith, essentially. I think that is the biggest thing. Is like I really don't want to be absorbed in that. So yeah, I think working with people who understand that and grant you that and have the sensibility and sensitivity to talk about your work in a way that's complex and multi-layered is really, really vital for me. Yeah.
Thank you, Ev. I want to touch on the topic of legacy. Collectors often become de facto archivists of cultural memory, especially where institutional histories have excluded African and diasporic narratives. So Ev, how does the idea of legacy apply in the context of your work? How would you like your work positioned and perceived now and by future generations?
Yeah, wow. But I feel like I kind of answered in the last question a little bit. I think it's really this idea of being part of conversations that are continuous too, you know, and not like, what's the word I'm looking for in English? There's no like specific end to them. Like they can always re-enter. They can always. You know, I see my friends work here, Luther Kanadu, and, you know, like, we speak together and we have both our practices, and he inspires me, and hopefully I inspire him a little bit too, and, you know, he's based in Winnipeg, I'm based here, and, like, I think we're really in worlds that are, yeah, very global. It's, like, quite a privilege to be able to move from one place to another. And so I really hope that, yeah, my work is really kind of one of multiple voices in this plethora, I would say. Maybe that's a French word I'm using in English. But yeah, I think like what I can do is stay true and honest in my practice. And hopefully that will transpire. I don't think there's much more that I can control. Like I think as long as you do things from a place that's very genuine, you know, it's a harder selling point, I think, sometimes to have this complexity, but hopefully it kind of ensures longevity.
And Ken, I'm curious about the space your collection will occupy in the future. I know you often bring your sons to galleries and are actively instilling an interest in art in future generations. What is the long-term vision for the Wedge collection, and what would it mean for a collection like yours to outlive you in a way that still reflects your values?
That's a great question, Yolanda. Yeah, I'm an old guy with young kids, so I do have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old, 2 sons who are, very creative, and I think that, it's very possible that they have careers in the arts, but it's also just it's early and hard to know. It's just as likely they end up being dentists or something, or not at all. So we don't know, but I can say that they'll have an appreciation of art because they're growing up in a house that is full of art, and it's very intentional where it's placed. And they actually come with me to a storage locker. They look on a website, Dada, I want, that work by that artist in my bedroom, So they're already into it, which is great. So they get first dibs. But it really is, as I said before, about leading with public access. So I do think that, at some point, I'd like to keep a lot of the collection together in certain containers, like I'm very much for me it's about a deep love of like black Canadian artistic practices, and so it would be great to think of all those works at some point, having an exhibition, and maybe those works go to a public gallery and it stays alive, the Wedge collection at blah blah blah. I'm friendly with curators here in Canada. It's my first love. I'm friendly with Thelma Golden at the Studio Museum. There's some work she's already asked about. It's kind of like the idea would be to put the works where they're going to have the most impact. And I also have to say, to be clear, I absolutely don't believe in flipping, buying a work and 2 or 3 years later the artist is hot and you're doubling your thing. I do think that there is a point though when work gets, for me at my level, I'm not a master of the universe like the Rubels or one of these giant collectors. There are works that get to a point that you're paying so much for it to mostly be in storage because it's too valuable to have in your home for your kids to throw a football around, and you don't want to lend it out because you've already done that many times. The work's getting kind of maybe too much. The chances of an accident are getting higher or being lost. So there is a time when you deaccession work as a collector. Not much, I've done it very rarely, but I think you do have to keep that in mind, always thinking about the public first. If there's an institution or a collection with a bigger access that can take that work, and if you can use the monies that are brought in from selling that work to acquire more works that are building up the collection, I think that's an important thing to consider. And I'm going to really, kind of end with a bit of a manifesto. And I know Ev knows this, we need more black people collecting. I just have to say, well, we need more black collectors, specifically thinking about works by black artists. I mean, there's a slide in there somewhere you might have seen where I'm actually at Documenta in 2007, and I'm meeting the artist who's wearing the flowing boo-boo. That's J.D. Okai Ojukeri. He's the artist who's died recently, but he's from Nigeria, and he did those famous or iconic hairstyles, like the back of women's heads. And early on, I bought his work and did a little show, in my home. That you see some pictures there. It used to be a kind of a public gallery in my house, this Wedge gallery, wedge-shaped space, and now it's the double entendre. It's sort of like wedging those artists into the story of contemporary art. But we did a show in 2002, and I'm on the phone with Ojukeri at that time. We're consigning work, we're planning. I actually had to buy 10 works that I then sold 6 of them. This is when I thought I'm going to be an art dealer, quickly realized storyteller. But I have to say, we worked a lot that year. We stayed in touch. And 2002, now it's 5 years later, 2007, I'm at Documenta. You have to remember, it's 2007. There's no social media really happening. So he hasn't seen me, and we're walking toward each other. I got my cell phone without social media, and I'm coming toward him in this giant hall in the Kunsthal, and we're in Kassel in Germany. And I'm saying, I'm right here, I'm walking toward you. It's opening day, there's lots of people. He's staying by his artwork, and he literally, when I got like 5 feet in front of him, he's like, Montague, that's you? He said, you're black? he really didn't have the experience of, in America, in Canada anyway, he didn't have the experience of having a black collector. It just didn't even dawn on him. The people who were buying his work were mostly in France, a couple of American collectors and a few abroad. He didn't realize that there was even such a thing as a black collector collecting his work over here. So that I say that as a story, an anecdote that sort of really reminded me, we just need more black folks in positions of power in the art ecosystem, not just collectors. Like, we're getting a few black artists now. My collection's a testament to that, which is great. But, you know, I'm telling young people now all the time, you know, we need more black critics and collectors and curators, gallery directors, gallery owners. Like, we need to have a better control over our story. I do think that, despite the fact I'm telling you that I collect works by all sort of artists about black life, I have to say that as black people, we have clearly a kind of a clearer sense of ourselves and how we want to be portrayed. And I think that really, it doesn't really change. You keep getting into these issues and problems with curating and with showing work when we just don't have enough people in the room. So I kind of, you know, I applaud you, what you're doing, Yolanda, as a gallery director. I think, you know, I'm not telling people not to be artists. I'm just saying, if you're young, you're black, think about other careers in the arts where we need to populate that ecosystem and not just have a moment where black artists are having a big moment and then it kind of goes back to, well, we're moving on to something else. I think this is my kind of manifesto these days, like working with that. And I got to say also that, you know, the collection itself, to again go back to your question, there's many ways that it can go out in the world, including some work staying in the family. But I do want to share that work. And I also have a very large book collection, books and art books. And I think that that's something I've started a kind of a Wedge library residency, so to speak, where, you know, someone's going to come in now and we have some sponsorship, corporate sponsorship. That's the nonprofit, not my collection. And, you know, that person can come and use works in the collection and books in the collection as a resource. So I'm really trying to activate it that way. And I can see that some kind of resource center at some point in the future, more than like a museum or something, you know? Anyway, long answer, short question. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. I have one last question, then I think we'll turn to the audience for their questions. So this is to both of you. Looking ahead to the next decade of African and diasporic art, what does a truly responsible collector look like, and what needs to change now to make that vision possible?
It's a question for you.
No, you're the artist. I want the artist's perspective on that. I told you how I feel as a collector. You know, come on, yeah.
I feel on the spot. I want to think about it.
Well, looking ahead to the next decade of African and diasporic art, what does a truly responsible collector look like, and what needs to change now to make that vision possible?
It looks like Ken.
It looks like Ken. Fair.
Obvious.
Yeah, like I said, you know, we need to balance the equation a little bit in terms of who's collecting. But I also think that, you know, institutions have a responsibility. That's where most people aren't seeing my collection in my home or at one of these shows that's around the globe or something. They're actually seeing works that I support. They're seeing them in galleries like the AGO, and like, you know, yesterday I was at Beaux-Arts here, and, you know, it was very thrilling to me to see, you know, works that they're collecting, new acquisitions from Regine Pereira and, you know, among many others, that I'm sort of like, okay, like it's kind of broadening out the collection. I think institutions have, like, not to deflect it so much from collectors, but, you know, collectors should donate to institutions to balance the equation, should make suggestions wherever possible. I mean, I'm an advisor to the new Contemporary African Art Department at the AGO, the Arts of Global Africa and the Diaspora, with Julie Crooks. And we're on the phone all the time. I just came back from Accra, Ghana, discovered some really great art practices. I pass it over to Julie. She's going to think about it. Maybe it becomes work that's in the collection, but that's how you can sort of like spread it around a bit and make sure that more people are going to have eyes on these works and these art practices get lift it up, you know?
I 100% agree with this, but also just stating, like, I think showing works of racialized people, of indigenous people is one step, and acquiring their work is another one that has a lasting impact too, even in terms of like livelihood. And I think institutions really need to not stop at this first step of just having us on the wall, but really commit to us and to our practice fully. Yes, thank you for saying that.
Amazing. Well, thank you both for your generous answers. I think we touched on some really interesting ground this evening. I want to now invite anyone in the audience who has a question to ask away. I think there's one on the end there.
Like here? Good. Hi, my name's Nicole. I own a marketing agency, and I'm also an ecosystem builder through my platform called Blackspo. I'm so fangirling right now. I just started art collecting like 2-3 years ago. Diane has been a huge influence in how I'm shaping my collection. And I have this question for you in terms of this idea of gatekeeping. So there's still a lot of gatekeeping in terms of people deciding what is collectible or who gets to collect, because these networks have increased biases. So what do you think maybe artists can do in terms of setting some perimeters so that like the curators or the galleries representing them ensure a little bit more accessibility? And what can collectors do in order to feel more included in a thoughtful, intentional way, rather than feeling like they don't belong? For both of you guys, I kind of asked it in two parts because I have this conversation a lot with artists. Like, I can't even get access to your collection because the person that's controlling the collection is already creating a bias in terms of who gets access to those pieces. So it's not only in terms of, I thought like, oh, when I make more money, I can buy more pieces, but it's way more complex than that. So I was curious from your standpoint, and then curious about like how you continue to persevere in like breaking through some of those biases.
I think it's up to, I'm going to say from the collector's perspective, and let Ev talk about from an artist perspective, but from the collector's perspective, it's on me. It's my job to educate myself as much about the artists and the artworks that I'm interested in acquiring. And I'm very honest and upfront with, you know, art dealers, like, I'd like to learn more, tell me more about this. I think if you come with kind of considered questions at the gate, then those people whose jobs, let's make no mistake, the job of the person at the front of the gallery is to gatekeep. You know, I'm talking about from a collector's point of view. You have to come with some homework done so that to me, that sign of, oh, this is someone who's truly interested, very quickly takes away the, you know, for most people, most gatekeepers, takes away that thing of, oh, who's this guy? He doesn't know anything about art. What's he doing walking in here? And, you know, like that, I'm talking about literally physical gatekeeping, that idea of like, and that's happened to me a lot. I actually missed a lot of early work when the going was good, before you guys were all born, when I started collecting in the early mid-90s. And, you know, artists I can think of like Ellen Gallagher, Glenn Ligon, who I eventually got to work, but, you know, going to their big galleries in New York, at that time Soho and later Chelsea, like just calling people up on the phone and being genuinely interested, but they just were not even going to let you in or even give you anything because you didn't really, you know, it's not about even knowing the game, just know a little bit about the artist and do the homework. I quickly learned the diligence involved in just doing some reading, and at that time there was really no kind of internet happening. You just read as much as you could about the artist. And now, for me, it's a bit easier that you have a collection that has a reputation that precedes you. But I do think that I have to say, I still encounter those moments, and I don't back down. I'm very persistent to show them that I'm intentional about this and I have a true interest. I try not to let emotion get in the way of it, and that's kind of what they're looking for, and you kind of start getting into a fight and the gate shuts even harder. It's like, just, kill them with knowledge and, you get through. But that's literally, from a collector's point of view about, kind of people ask all the time these kind of talks, like, how do you approach a gallery? And yeah, you approach them with some knowledge and true interest in the artist, You're probably gonna talk about it.
No, I'm so shocked. I did not know this. Thank you for teaching me that. I'm kind of stunned, actually. So I would say as an artist, it feels like, to me, the thing I could do is ensure I have a good relationship with my gallery, and that we have conversations to make sure that the people who represent your work know your work, appreciate it, want the best for it, and you're aligned in your vision and in your desires. Maybe that's more an advice for artists than for collectors, but not that it's necessarily always easy, but I think keeping in mind, there's this idea of not all opportunity is a good opportunity, but not all relationships are good relationships, and all relationships need care and communication. So for sure, I think making sure we're surrounded by people who, have our interests at heart. And I think for sure, for me, if somebody reaches out to me and is genuine and loves my work, I want them to be able to own it and make sure that it aligns too. Like, sometimes you don't have control, and a bank will buy my work about gentrification, or sometimes you're like, this doesn't seem aligned. But so yeah, I think maybe reaching out to artists as a first stepping stone before a studio visit and things like that, as a first stepping stone before maybe reaching out to the gallery, and there's a bit of a relationship that's been created.
Hi, my name is Yomi. Can everybody hear me clearly? I'm not sure. Okay. Okay. I always get told I talk low, so I'm thinking about the line between being a collector and being an artist. My question is really to both of you. How important do you think, especially thinking about collecting as investing or be custodianship or just building a legacy, how important do you think it is for artists to collect your own work? Especially, say, an artist is signed to a gallery and they just want you to bring out work. When is it important to say yes and no, to keep stuff for yourself? How important is it to build your own archive or your own vault?
Yeah, very good question. Again, I'm stunned because I'm an installation-based artist doing this talk, but I think when I develop bodies of work, because of the nature of my practice, I don't think about my practice as object making primarily. It's really about world building, and there's a lot of things that for me it's important in my practice to thinking about, climate collapse, to also do things that are not creating extra waste, or things that can return to the soil or nature, or that I can put back where I took. So that's a big part of it. So I think then the archive becomes about having really good documentation. I cannot state the importance. Sometimes I'm on a lot of juries and I see people don't have documentation of their work, and it's a shame because it is the primary way that we consume works at the end of the day, more than in galleries. So I think, yeah, having a system where your bodies of work are together and they're, you know, you're kind of keeping tabs for yourself is important. And then in terms of, yeah, what comes out of it or the objects, you know, often I'll be like, okay, I've got maybe only 4 frames surrounding this body of work and a video. And then that's when the relationship with the gallery kind of comes in, where you want them to be able to, yeah, catalog it. But also sometimes there's stuff that I look into bodies of work I've produced and I'm like, this to me doesn't feel like I want it to be in the catalog. This is a project that was, you know, not a test, but maybe not something that's like fully finished. It's something I still want to visit. It's something that I still want to develop over like, you know, multiple years. And so there's been moments where I was like, oh no, this I want to keep because it doesn't feel ready to be released out in this way. Or sometimes ethical questions, like I've had a video that I love, but I use a lot of like, you know, it's kind of a desktop video, so I have a lot of images that don't belong to me, and in the sense, like I've modified them, so it's an artwork in itself, but there's like, you know, very difficult questions around like rights and ownership and things like that. So I take the conscious decision of not selling that work, so I'm not profiting from it, I'm not benefiting from it. And again, a conversation to have with my gallery where I'm like, you know, this is clear that this work cannot be sold. It's important for me, but it can be shown and things like that. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers your question. That's the way that I answer them in my practice. And it keeps evolving, and sometimes you're like, oh, actually I have this and I love it. Can we do something with it, you know?
Do we have any more questions?
Gotta give a shout out to Renee Matthews, who's here. That's her work right here, taking her blue jeans and making this wig out of it. It's a kind of an identity piece, but Renee, I did not expect to be here. That's Renee right there. Yeah. Wedge collection. Yeah. Right behind Hannah. Yeah. All right.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to the, oh, we have another question.
I have a question. It's about acquisition and where you source artists. I started collecting when I moved here to Canada 5 years ago, mainly Black Canadian artists. Most of the pieces I bought directly from the artists. It's a process I really enjoyed a lot. The most expensive piece I bought from a white gallery, and I have to admit, I really didn't enjoy doing that. I didn't really want to hear like a white person explaining black art to me. But I did it. I mean, I wanted the piece, and that's where it came from. So my question is, Ev, for you as an artist, does it make a difference with whom you show your work? And Ken, for you as a collector, does it make a difference from whom you purchase the work?
That's a great question, and I feel your pain with that sometimes. To answer first, I think if you love the work, you have to push past the gatekeeper or the person that might be turning you off the work and recognize that it does have resonance for you. So yeah, I mean, I'm sorry that has happened to you. I will say that in my experience, I'm always looking for art dealers who have a deeper connection to the artists of color in their stables, and like this idea of everyone jumping on the block with having at least one black artist on their roster. This is a really funny thing from my perspective. Many of you that weren't in this long art game as a collector so long might not know a time when you went to a Plural art fair, you went to Art Toronto, or more damningly, you went to a bigger fair like Frieze in London, or the Armory show, and shockingly, you could just see the 1 or 2 or 3, I'm not joking, maybe 5 works by black artists in a show of like 200 galleries. And then there's this moment that happened in the last 20 years, it got a little more in the last 10 years, and really much bigger in these last 5 or 6 years since Black Lives Matter, where it's kind of obviously makes good economic sense for those galleries to have a black artist. But I'm looking really, I take the long view, I'm looking for people that when I start talking to that gallerist, I can sense or feel when the support is genuine, not to shout you out, Oog, but I see Oog Charbonneau here. I remember Oog, someone who's had works in his collection from Manuel Mathieu, from Marija, Kitenge, Banga, all these artists for Banza for many years, and it's not just sort of jumping on a bandwagon. It makes me, it wouldn't prevent me from acquiring those works if they were with another gallery, but it does give me a sense of confidence of what I'm acquiring, and a sense of kind of satisfaction that the artist is so happy with their dealer. There's and not just to signal you out, Oog, there are many dealers like this, but not nearly as many, as the dealers who kind of, jumped on the bandwagon lately. And I know because many of them are already going, oh, black figurative painting is sort of passé, let's move to the next thing. And you can see they don't have a black artist anymore. And, it's sort of a, it's jokey, but it's also very sad that there's this sense, and some galleries, from the jump, newer galleries like Cooper Cole, the whole mandate, the intention is about diversity and representation. It's your DNA. And so, from, who works there, who you're promoting, their programming. So I do think that there is a future where, for sure, where that kind of gallery, this model of a more equitable roster, women, men, and and a kind of a sense of artists who are moving forward, may have a more fluid identity. All these issues that we talk about now as issues should really just be like comme d'habitude. It should be like the normal thing. So I do think that we're in a moment of kind of went backwards a little bit, clearly, especially with what's happening in America, and I can feel it as a lender to shows that feature black artists. There's a real kind of pushback now. But I don't think I'm certain this moment is not forever. I think it's up to us to kind of keep our foot on the gas and take the long view and not get caught up in I gotta buy this because it's hot right now. Rather, it's just like about having a long view, and that's around legacy, and that's around thinking and leading with the artist,
Yeah, thank you for your question, and thanks for this answer. It definitely does matter who or where shows your work. However, in my experience, I don't think, there's no black and white, and so, oh, that was not intended, the pun, but but it does matter, but I think it matters that you have a great sense of self and of your practice as an artist. I've worked with many different kinds of people in many different kinds of institutions. Sometimes, 1 week I'm like bringing my works in a blizzard, driving them, and then another week it's like all expenses paid and I'm drinking a mocktail on a terrace. Like you have so many different kind of institutions who are going to welcome you as an artist, and you really need to be able to, I think, be flexible and adaptable. And so with the people I've worked with, like who, for instance, write about your work, present your work, I think these things are in conversation, and usually when people present your work, it's because they're interested. But I do my research. Like if I get an invitation, I look up the person or the people or the institution. I look at what's the past shows they've done. Have they shown other artists of color or not? what type of writing do they do? You know, you kind of have to, do your homework as well. And then enter this, I think, again, as like a discussion. There has been moments where I was like, I'm not interested, but I'm not comfortable in being compared with this other Black musician. I don't see the relationship. I don't want it to be narrowing down, you know, when the curator changed the text. And it's not like something mean, it's just like it does matter how it's being presented, how it's been talked about. And it's important for you as an artist too that you explain that to people and that you give some grace to, because I think, we're all in like a learning, big shuffling, big shifting period. And if we don't have open conversations, like we're really not going forward. So definitely always open to kind of bridge gaps and bring understanding closer, and be grateful when people are interested as well.
Thank you. I think we're over time. Yeah? One more question? Okay, we're going to wrap things up. I want to thank you, Ken and Ev. It was my absolute pleasure to share the stage with you this evening and hear from you. A special thank you to Nigra Iuventa for the invitation and platform. And I also want to thank the audience for your attention, and to our ASL interpreters, and of course to Plural for having us.